Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for your time. I have a brief update for you on California law. This is not California gun law. However, if you are a California firearms owner, or for that matter, if you're a firearms owner anywhere, you might want to know about this because what starts in California often goes other places. This really refers to ham radio in the state of California and something that the California government has just very recently done to cause harm to the emergency communications system. If California starts doing this, somebody else is going to start doing it in another state. So I want to make sure you're aware of it. Recently, what happened is California has essentially ditched ham radio as its backup to its backup where emergency communications is concerned. So to give you just some quick background where ham radio is concerned, in case you're not an amateur radio operator, I am. I'm a licensed ham KM6ZBL. I want to make sure that you know how it works and why it works, and I'll give you that very brief tutorial, I guess, and give you the Reader's Digest version in 5 minutes or less, actually probably in 30 seconds or less. The way ham radio works is you have an individual transmitter receiver, a transceiver, like any other broadcast radio. You get a little walkie-talkie to play with as a kid, or you get the GMRS radio or the FRS radio you use when you're at Disneyland to communicate with your family. Very similar to that. You can have a radio in your car, like a CB radio or whatever, but it's an amateur radio, different frequencies, different way of functioning. In order to make these super efficient so that you can take a very small HT, a handheld transceiver like this one, which is only 5 watts, and you can still talk to somebody across the county, across the state, all the way in another state or whatever, there is a network of what are called repeaters. And repeaters are transmitter receivers sitting on top of high peaks. Sometimes they're on the top of tall buildings. Sometimes they're on the top of mountains. Sometimes they're whatever the highest point is around. The idea being that by virtue of having that transmitter receiver on the mountain, it can receive the signal from someone broadcasting or transmitting on their small receiver, and then retransmit that same message so that somebody on the other side of the mountain or somebody farther away can hear it, because it has line of sight. It's very high up, so it can see farther, and that transmitter has a lot more power. Instead of 5 watts, it may have 100, it may have 500, it may have 1,000. It depends on the particular repeater. So let me give you a visual representation of that so that you understand how this works. You can see that if you're on one side of the mountain and someone else is on the other side of the mountain, because radio is line of sight on these frequencies, you can't talk to each other. But because there's a repeater on the mountain, you can talk to the repeater. The repeater then transmits that to the person you're talking to, and you guys can communicate back and forth because of the repeater. And those repeaters are essentially just transmitters, and they're sitting on top of large towers like this one. You can notice if you look at this tower, there's all kinds of different transmission antennas and reception antennas on it. You can see satellite antennas on it and microwave antennas on it. And if you look very carefully on the top there, you can see a couple of standard radio antennas, or just tall, thin antennas like you would see on the top of your car. Those are all different types of antennas that are connected to different types of transmitters and receivers, and they share that tower in order to accomplish their goal of transmitting and receiving their individual information. So a lot of folks will share a tower. Okay, now that you've gotten that brief explanation, let me explain what California has essentially done. I showed you the big tower. Okay. Ham radio clubs and organizations, there's a lot of them. I belong to 2, plus ARRL and a few other things. But in my local area, there's a ham radio club, and I belong to it. And we have a couple of repeaters that the club owns. And I also belong to a couple of other clubs that own repeaters. And there are clubs of hams who are very technical in nature. They're engineers and so on, and they are just repeater clubs, and you can contribute to their repeater. They post repeaters in various parts around our county, up and down the state, connected to other states, and so on. And that little image I showed you of the 2 individuals with a small handheld transceiver talking to each other across the mountain, well, what else happens is a repeater can talk to a repeater. So you can have a chain of those repeaters, and you can be speaking to this one. This one is then relaying that transmission to the next repeater, which is going to the next repeater, which is going to the next repeater, and you're talking to somebody 600, 800 miles away on a little 5-watt transceiver because of the repeater network. That network is owned and maintained by individual clubs. It's not a government thing. The clubs purchase the equipment, maintain the equipment, upgrade the equipment. They're constantly upgrading it to keep it right on the ragged edge of technology all the time. There are digital repeaters, analog repeaters. They're all over the place. And every week, these clubs will have events where hams get to practice transmitting so that during an emergency, they can help out with law enforcement, fire, hospitals, and so on. Tonight, it's Monday, I'm going to post this in just a few minutes. Tonight, the net in El Cajon is going to go on, and I'm going to be on what they call the donut net, because they talk about what kind of donut have you had this week. And we practice, there's different quizzes and like that, and it's an opportunity to practice on your radio, and I'll be on the donut net, participating in that later on this evening with the El Cajon amateur radio club, because they have the donut net, and I can hit the repeater from where I live with my larger radio, maybe not with this one, but I can hit it with the other one, and I can communicate and be part of that. So that's an opportunity to practice. Why is this important? There are clubs that help out with fire communications, police communications. There are clubs here in San Diego County, for example, and across the country that work with hospitals to make sure that when communications go down, the ham radio operators can step in and provide communications between hospitals, from the hospital to the emergency crews on the street and out servicing people and taking care of people. All that communications backup is provided by ham radio clubs and ham radio operators. Traditionally, as a part of that, in the state of California and other states, it's early in the morning, I'm not quite alive yet, but traditionally, as a part of that, these large towers, like the one I showed you, I'll put it up there again for you, these large towers, which are generally owned by the Forest Service and the government and so on, allow ham radio clubs to place an antenna there and to have a repeater at the foot of the tower for the purpose of being able to use that tall space in case emergency communications are needed. That way, if the government's comms go down, which happens a lot more than you think it happens, ham radio operators can step in and help. That is what the California government is now changing. They're saying, okay, if you want to have your repeater there and you want to have your antenna there, we're going to charge you rent. You have to strike an agreement with us. There's a fee for you, and we're going to charge you thousands of dollars of rent to put that there because we don't see any benefit in you being there. Well, the fact is that ham radio operators have in the past and regularly do still today, without you knowing it, if you're not a ham radio operator, pull the California government and local governments butts out of the fire, literally, when their communication systems go down. Let me give you an example. In 2011, I think it was, we had the Great Blackout in the Southwest. It went from the shore in San Diego all the way to Arizona, and from Tijuana and Mexicali in Mexico all the way north to Orange County in California. Everything went black at once. We lost landlines, cell phones, everything. My son at the time was in college, and I had dropped him off there. So I went to go pick him up. And of course, there's no communications. I can't text him and say, hey, I'm going to be at this spot to get you home. So I go to pick him up. I happen to see a campus cop, and I stopped and talked to him. I said, hey, I'm just curious. Can you guys coordinate a little bit? I'm trying to find my son. There's not very many people on campus. I'm wondering if you could let the other officers know I'm looking for him. He said, I'd love to do that, sir, but our comms are down. I thought, okay, that's where I learned my lesson. You will note that everywhere I go, I have a little HT like this in my car because I want to make sure I can find my boy, And then we use the little Garmin inReaches, which I don't have with me, but you can look those up if you want, for satellite comms, as a family if the repeaters go down. But because there are repeaters on just about every mountain around here, I know I can find my boy or anybody else by just jumping on this if every other kind of comms are down. I can't depend upon government communications, and even government communications doesn't depend on government communications. Who do they call in an emergency when everything goes down? Ham radio operators, because guess what? When that big tower gets burned down or something gets destroyed like that, it's the ham radio clubs that have mobile repeaters. We have towers that are mobile. We drive it up there, put it up, stand it up, get the battery operated radios out. We've got powerful repeaters. We set them up, and guess what? The repeater network is back up again. Okay, well, Why am I bringing this up? Because if you're a gun owner, you're probably a little bit of a prepper. This is important to you if you want to get information. Now, I've talked for a while here. I'm going to post part of a video by K6UDA, who's a radio operator. That's a great channel, by the way. And then I'll put a link to his channel so that you can check out the entire video. And I will put a link to an article, an article that came out from ARRL. I urge you to contact your California representatives and make some noise about this, because people will die. I'm going to just predict it. People are going to die because communications are going to go down, because the government thinks its reverse 911 system and all this other stuff always works. It doesn't. That's why the government routinely goes to ham radio operators for help. And now they want to take the towers down so that we don't have the repeaters anymore. That's the bottom line. So check out this video, and I'll be back briefly in just a second.
This story started in this tiny little town called Shingle Town, California. This is deep within rural California in Shasta County. It is just 50 miles from the heart of the Paradise Fire, which, less than a year ago, took out an entire town and killed hundreds of people. Like I said, Shasta County is one of the northernmost counties in the state of California. Very, very rural, very, very prone to forest fires. Everybody that lives in these areas is keenly aware of the danger of wildfires. And this group in Shingle Town has created a group of hams, a very well-organized militia of hams, non-hams, all kinds of people from the community, and almost everybody in the community is somehow connected with this communications group, because they realize that in the case of a fire, in the case of a lot of these emergencies, the first thing to go in their area is internet services. The cell phone service goes down. There is virtually no infrastructure for communications at that point. And like in the Paradise Fire, a lot of people were hurt and killed because they didn't have the communications to be able to be warned. So yes, in the state of California, there is this thing called the reverse 911, and they have all these really, really neat systems to warn people to evacuate, to do, to seek shelter in place, evacuate, do whatever needs to get done. But when all these systems fail all at the same time, there's only one thing that keeps working, and that is the infrastructure of ham radio and radio communications, because it isn't an infrastructure. It isn't a real infrastructure. It is made up of this person to this person. You know the drill. Now, this is the actual email that was sent out, or the letter that was sent out from the nameless, faceless, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat named Lorena Fisi from Cal Fire. Basically, it goes like this. Dear John, I do understand and appreciate all the services you have provided in the past. However, with constantly changing technological advantages, there is no longer the same benefit to the state of California as previously provided. Therefore, the department no longer financially supports ham radio operators or their tenancy. Now, Shingle Town attorney Nathan Zelliff pretty much said it way better than I can, and he wrote a 14-page letter to the state of California and Lorena, accurately stating that the cost to the state of California is nothing. We own the equipment, we maintain the equipment, they just house it there, which costs them nothing extra. He goes on to talk about how their group in Shingle Town in Shasta County has gone ahead and implemented their own communications and early warning system in addition to the state system, which has failed as late as, let's say last year and into this year. He references the state's expensive color pamphlet that got handed out door to door, telling everybody to have a communications plan and practice it regularly. Yet now they're disbanding their own propaganda. That's wonderful. Thank you, Lorena. You know, this town has also been plagued with situations where they've lost their 911 capabilities, their radio capabilities. All the cell phones were out and down. And oh, by the way, PG&E now cuts off the power before the fire starts when there's high wind conditions. So they can't get news and information except on something like, say a ham radio. Shasta County's own emergency operations plan utilizes ham radio within it, and they understand, and they even state it right there, that under these kinds of circumstances, their normal radio communications will become overloaded, and they need ham radio to help with all the disaster preparations, operations, and aftermath. Now, Nathan also outlined very recent incidents where ham radio has been monitored by the police and used in conjunction with public safety during these emergencies. And man, I'll tell you what, Nathan did a very, very good job laying out all of the stuff in his exhibits that have happened right there in Shingle Town.
All right, now I urge you once again, go check out K6UDA's channel. I'll put the link in the description. Go check out the entire video he put in. I will put that in the description, plus the article. I'll put that in the description. Those links will all be in the description of this video. And then I'll also make sure that we post in the description the contact information of the person at the state of California you want to reach out to and communicate that this is a very bad idea for the safety of Californians. Thank you very much for watching. I apologize for being so long-winded about all this. Have a wonderful week, and please be safe.